Today's lesson is all about energy. Now, before you start watching this video, you're going to need to make sure that you have your green workbook ready, open to page 75, where you will find an energy quiz, or you need to have a piece of scrap or blank paper because I will be giving you a version of this quiz. So please pause this video, go and get that stuff, and then come back to me when you're done. Okay, everybody ready? So, we're going to talk about probably the resource that affects you the most on the daily basis, and that happens to do with energy. Think about the number of times that you're plugging in your iPhone to charge, that you are booting up your brand new PlayStation game, that you're getting in a car and getting your mom to drive you to work, or even just so that you can turn the light on your bedroom so that you can find where all those dirty socks are that you've been hiding. That is powered by energy. And of course, when we think about energy, we often think about how much we tend to use here in North America, because the truth is, where and how we live affects how much energy we consume. Take a look on the left-hand side there, and you can see a outrageous Christmas display, and there's always pictures of these kinds of things on YouTube nowadays. And to the right, you see something that is a much more humble shot, where the energy that he uses is what burns at the end of a candle so that he can see the book that he's reading. Just a little bit different than the kind of energy consumption that we're used to. Take a look at this, for instance. Most maps, of course, have to do with a representation of area, but this is a map that looks at how much energy we use. So over here, this is a map that has to do with the world's population. So you can see that there are some areas where there's lots and lots of people living. Like, for instance, it's a little bit warped, but most of you will probably recognize that that's India. And this big green blob over here, that's China. And China has a lot of people, approaching 2 billion people last time we checked. Look over here at us. We're a tiny little smear on top of a very bulgy United States. So our population is quite low compared to the rest of the world. When we go over here and we take a look at the amount of fuel or energy that we consume, look at how much smaller China is here compared to up here. And look at how much bigger the United States is compared to over here, which means a relatively small population, but a high amount of energy use. Even us, although we're hard to see because we're sort of stretched over the top, you can see that we're still using way more energy than what this little sliver of population would suggest. And of course, you've probably seen this picture before, but if you look at the world at night, you can see where most of our energy use is concentrated. There's the United States. There's us in that bright, shiny spot right there. Here's a whole lot of energy use happening in Europe, but the rest of the world, comparatively, is quite dark. They don't use nearly as much energy in order to power their city lights and homes. And the truth is, and you probably know this already, that here in the developed world, we are energy hogs, which means that we use way more energy compared to the other people that live on this planet with us. So, this is the quiz that I'm talking about. You have a version of this on page 75 in your workbook, so I would like you to pause the video now at this point. If you don't have your workbook, then use this. If you do have your workbook, then I would like you to use that instead. Come back to me when you're finished. Okay, all done? Excellent. So you can see that you have some questions here about entertainment, so watching televisions or videos or DVDs or playing games. You have things about personal care, right? Taking those long showers. We talked a little bit about those when we were doing water consumption. And we also have cars and things like that. If you were to score at the end, you could see that if you scored only between 0 and 20 points, you're considered to be a light energy user. But if you scored any higher than that, then you're moderate up to heavy energy use. And I'm willing to bet that quite a few of you find yourself either here or way above that. Why? Because I know that Brampton, especially suburban Brampton, tends to have a really high level of energy use. So take some time to think about that and think about what that might mean for our country, for our planet, and so on and so forth, because we just kind of take it for granted when we flip the light on and here comes the electricity. So why is it that we use so much energy as Canadians? Well, I always say that we have some good reasons and we have some really bad reasons. A good reason is that we are a big country with a very small population. So for instance, I have relatives in Calgary and Vancouver. I can't, ride my bike there. I could, but it would take me a really long time. Instead, I have to use a plane or I have to drive. And that uses a lot of energy in order for us to travel back and forth. So I would say that that's a fairly good reason for us to use a lot of energy. The other one is the winter. Right now it's -8 degrees outside. It's very, very cold. We need furnaces in order to keep our homes warm so that we survive. And in the summer, well, I suppose we don't have to have air conditioning, but when it gets up to be about 40 degrees with the humidex, we need to be very careful about our health. So a lot of people would say that we do need to have air conditioning during that time, especially for someone with respiratory illnesses or things like that. As well, because we are a developed country, we have lots of factories that require a lot of energy to be operational. And in order to do that, we have to produce a lot of energy in order to run that manufacturing. The last two, though, I would say that those are bad reasons why we have such high energy use. Canadians are big consumers. We have a high standard of living. Today is Black Friday, which is that famous shopping frenzy day in November after American Thanksgiving. And we always see pictures of people stampeding. We can't get enough stuff. But really, the biggest reason for Canadians is that we don't have to pay a lot for our energy, so we waste it. And do we ever? Now, we're all connected, and we're connected in with the United States. So if you look, we're over here. This is our main hydro grid along here that powers energy to all the areas where we are. But we have a lot of sharing that we do with New York and all these different kinds of places. So our grid in which electricity is supplied to us is all very, very interconnected. So the question is, what happens if this delivery of electricity is disrupted in any way along this area? And you might be a little bit too young to remember, but most of us do remember that in 2003, there was a huge electricity blackout. See how it looks like the United States has a big bite out of it right here? That would have been that area where we would have had all of the electricity go out. And why did it go out? It went out because on a very, very hot day, we all cranked up our air conditioners and the electrical system was running at peak capacity. So all it would take is one little thing for the entire electricity system to go down. And it turns out it was a fire in a small electrical station, and it caused this cascade effect that caused us to all take a real good hard look at how much electricity we were going to be using. Okay, so nitty-gritty, ABCs of power generation. We separate them into two. We call one side conventional, and we call one side alternative. So conventional would be our commonly used energy sources that include things like fossil fuels and hydroelectric power. And sometimes we would also say that this one here, nuclear, belongs over in conventional as well. Those include non-renewable sources like coal, oil, and natural gas, and hydroelectric, and as well sometimes nuclear. Alternative sources are energy sources that are considered to be an alternative to fossil fuel and are a little bit more rare. So you might have seen the windmill down by the CNE, that would be wind power, solar panels, as well peat and yes, feces. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. Tidal power, especially out in New Brunswick, and geothermal is a new one that we've been using where we use the energy from deep down inside the core of the earth in order to power our homes and heat, things like that. Okay? Hydrogen is a very, very new one that we're just working on right now. In Canada, our biggest source of energy would be those fossil fuels. Look at this. There's crude oil right there. And there's natural gas right there, and that black wedge right there is coal. That makes up 87.1% of all of the energy sources that exist. So like I said, fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. If you're interested in knowing this link, you can check it on Angel. Why do we call fossil fuels the F word? Well, because although they have some really big advantages, like that they're cheap and you can create a lot of power with them, and that we have quite a bit of it left over, it is dirty, dirty stuff. It causes a huge amount of pollution, lots of greenhouse gas emissions, which can exacerbate climate change. We're going to run out of the stuff eventually, and any attempts to extract or burn requires heavy machinery and tends to destroy the environment in and around it. But we know that we have to start shutting this stuff down, coal plants especially, because they cause a lot of that smog that makes it so hard for us to breathe in the summer. So what are we going to be putting in its place? We're going to be looking at much more renewable energy sources like wind, solar, tidal waves, geothermal, hydrogen, hydroelectricity, just like that list that we were looking at before. When it comes to Ontario, though, our biggest electricity generation is, believe it or not, nuclear energy. So we actually use uranium to create nuclear fission in order to create energy. We're splitting little bits off of the atom in order to create heat, which powers steam. which powers the generator to power electricity. It has a lot of advantages because it's renewable. It doesn't create any air pollution, and we have a lot of uranium deposits, but it also has problems with radioactivity. I mean, look what happened with Japan during the tsunami last year. You can have really devastating accidents that can cause widespread pollution. And the other part is that it does create waste. It creates these depleted uranium rods, and we don't entirely know what to do with them because they stay radioactive for so long. Oftentimes we'll just bury them until they calm down a little bit, and then maybe someday we'll find some way to safely dispose of them. Okay, renewable energy sources, they are much better for the environment. They're renewable. They're not going to run out. The wind is always going to blow. The sun is always going to shine. Very little pollution is created once the system is up and running. You can put solar panels on your own roof, which is kind of cool. But there are some issues with that. It tends to be very expensive to put in place at first. And as well, you know, if there are problems with generating capacity, like if the wind's not blowing on that particular day, then you're not going to get the same kind of electricity that you need. So it can be very, very, very different. And unfortunately, in Canada at least, or in Ontario, only about 2% of our electricity mix is being generated by windmills and solar panels, despite what the fancy commercials might say. So really, what is the problem? In Ontario, at least, we continue to increase our alternative energy sources, but really we're still using too much. And although it was very dirty, the nice part about coal was that it was a source of on-demand energy. If suddenly our electricity needs were to boost because it was so hot out or something like that, then we could just fire up the coal generators and we could create as much electricity as we needed. Now that we don't have that anymore, what will happen if we just continue to keep firing those air conditioners and turning on all our lights and doing all sorts of stuff that we know that we're not supposed to have? Well, what might happen? We'll potentially have another blackout just like we had in 2003, or the cost of electricity is going to go up really, really high. So we need to be very conscientious about our energy use. So, suggestions for tomorrow when you're coming in to get ready for the lesson. Please check out the GridWatch app if you're an iPhone or iPad user. It's kind of a cool little app that shows you the mix of electricity generation for Ontario at any given time. Bring your completed Energy Hog survey score with you so that we know what score you may have had. And be prepared to think critically about information that I present to you tomorrow about energy use. Thanks for listening.